a large number of people, or especially millennials, are getting this new understanding that something happens, just like authors get, writer's block and musicians kind of lose their muse, so to speak, that people who are in business get to a point sometimes where they feel like they've lost their ability to be innovative, to be at the top of their game, to think outside of the box. And that's really where a creative rest deficit will present itself.
This is the Brandon Smith Show, and of course, I'm your host, Brandon Smith. So for our conversation today, we're going to talk about something that I know all of my clients deal with, and I know all of you listening to the show deal with. How do you carve out time for yourself? In particular, how do you carve out that important time for you to rest, recharge, and renew? Because that's a really hard thing to do. And frankly, how important really is it? So for our conversation today, I have the fantastic pleasure of having an expert in this area. So Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith. Saundra, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, and so not only is this something that you do, and we'll talk more about your world and your life, but I also want to spotlight your book, Sacred Rest, which really focuses on the importance of this. And I love that you use the word sacred because it is such a precious, important thing. Absolutely. So as we go into this conversation, before we jump into what you see with your patients and clients and folks who've come to you, tell us a little bit more about you. How did you get into this space, and what does your world look like today?
Well, I'm a board-certified internal medicine physician, so I was constantly being bombarded with patients coming in with a complaint that I'm tired all the time. And, that's one of those things where as an internist, you're wanting to kind of dive deep, make sure there's no metabolic issues going on, no hormonal issues. And what I found was probably about 85% of those people, all of their tests came back negative.
85%?
Didn't know anything, but they still said they felt exhausted all the time. And so, the thyroid's good.
Wow.
All of your electrolytes are good. So, and, medicine told me to tell them to get 8 hours of sleep. If you get 8 hours of sleep, you should be well rested and ready to go. Well, even when they got 8 hours of sleep, they weren't well rested. And honestly, for the longest time, I just thought, okay, well, it must probably be in their head. I mean, I'm just being honest. That's what
totally. I would have thought the same thing.
And so, but that changed when I was the one saying that same thing. I'm tired all the time. And I knew I was getting 8 hours, but I had gotten to a point in my career where I'd had 2 kids within 2 years of each other. So I had toddlers at home. I had a full-time career, a marriage, and I had all the things kind of coming at me at one time. And I really could get an understanding that despite the blood work and all being good, I was exhausted. I mean, that deep bone level exhausted, where there seems like, even if I wake up after the 8 hours, I just need to roll back over for another 20.
Yeah.
And so I started looking at what can the issues be if it's not just sleep. And that's when the discovery of more than one type of rest really came out, and really where my research began.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So maybe, I don't know, a good starting place to enter into this, because just talking about this, I'm feeling tired. I'm wondering, what are some ways to diagnose this? So talk to us a little bit about what are some of those, if you think about everyone listening to the show, I'm sure whether they're driving in their car, they're exercising in the gym, they are nodding their heads in agreement going, that is me. But then where do I go from that? So where do we start?
Yeah, well, really for my patients, what I have them start with is really a self-assessment. They have to determine which of the 7 types of rest they are most deficient in. And for most people, first of all, that's hard for them because they don't even know that there are 7 types of rest. They just know they're tired. And so just to kind of give a glimpse of what those 7 types of rest are, the 3 that most people are well familiar with are the physical, the mental, and the spiritual. And then the 4 that most people have never heard of, and that are usually the ones that are really the biggest deficiencies, are the emotional, social, sensory, and creative rest. And so once we kind of start looking at where are they pouring out in their life, because the area where you're pouring out the most is the area where you're most likely to get a deficiency. Just to give a quick example.
Yeah.
Work with lots of teachers, lots of counselors, lots of people who are dealing with the public, who are working with others. And so they're pouring out emotionally and socially, but they never really think about, how do I feel myself back up in the places where I spend most of my time pouring? And once they start taking a look at that, then they're able to restore their rest deficit in that area. And you start feeling more energized because you're not living out of this chronic drain.
Wow, that's brilliant. I love that. So let's take that idea of emotional for a minute. Partly when I see in that in emotional, I mean, I think about our friends who work any kind of nonprofit space. Seems like emotional is a very big kind of area where they're pouring out all the time. And when I work with those folks, they're always tired, always exhausted. So what are some common avenues to take to help us on the emotional side?
Yeah, the emotional rest and the social, I'll discuss them together because they're very similar. Let me kind of differentiate the two, because I think those are the two hardest to separate. The emotional rest is actually the rest that we get when we're able to allow ourselves to be authentic, to not have our mask up, to not have our personal and professional personas kind of in place. So I see people who tend to have more emotional rest deficit tend to be those who are in authority, who are in leadership, who are having others look up to them, because there's an energy that's expelled to live up to others' expectations and to always be kind of in the front line of what's seen within a company or an organization. And so it's important for those people to really think about, when do I allow myself, or who do I allow myself to have those opportunities to be truly authentic, to not feel like I have to kind of keep things behind closed doors or behind a wall, keep those barriers, those personal barriers that we put up, that I can just let it all out. I call them those 2 or 3 true friends, where you can show up without the makeup, without being shaved, whatever it is, you can show up and you don't feel like they're judging you because you know that you're accepted. The problem when there isn't emotional rest is that people have a tendency to feel like I am never enough, because I'm always having to kind of put on airs or be a certain way to be accepted. And so that's exhausting. That can't be your day to day. That is an exhausting way to live. And so that's why it's so important. And some of the simple things are really just to get really clear about who those 2 or 3 true friends are. And unfortunately, with many adults, true friends kind of get pushed to the wayside because we have so many other responsibilities. And so adult friendships tend to be on a downward spiral, when really, to stay at our healthiest emotionally, it needs to be something that's of importance to us.
Yes, I can see just the way you described it, the connection between that emotional and even relational, how those can be very connected. And if we're smart, we might actually be able to kind of hit both of those at the same time.
Absolutely. And that's really where the social rest part comes into it, because social rest is getting an understanding of how people pull from you. If you think about it, your kids, your spouse, people you work with, or that your colleagues, your clients, most of them are needing something from you. They're putting a demand on either your creativity or your resources. They're needing things from you. So there's a negative pull, a negative energy pull from your life in that relationship. For social rest, it's taking a look at what are the positive energy relationships that you have. Those people who aren't asking anything from you, that you feel renewed and restored and energized from being around. Because most of our time will really be allocated to the people who are negatively pulling from us because they need things. And usually there are people that are very close within our lives, our kids, our elderly parents, our spouses, people that are needing things from us. But we also have to make sure that we are allowing ourselves to stay at our healthiest, which means that we have to have those positive relationships.
So I have a question for you. This is very real time for me. I'm not going to go into too much detail for lots of reasons, but I found myself over the last week talking about one particular individual that was draining me. I wasn't necessarily interacting with this individual, but this person was taking up a lot of my emotional energy and a lot of my conversational energy with others. I almost felt like I had to vent all the time about this person. Where would that fall into this spectrum? Where are they draining me?
They're draining you socially.
Okay.
because you're not necessarily having to put on airs with this person, so to speak, or or I would
I got
assume,
it.
I don't know the dynamics of the relationships, but I would, sounds like you weren't having to kind of put on airs or be something you weren't. They're just requiring a lot of your social interaction.
Yeah, I was
They're
mostly
pulling
I was just complaining a
you in
lot
this
about
way.
him. I mean, that was really it. But I was
And
found
so the
myself
way to
complaining so
counteract
much. I'm like, this is not productive. It's not good for me. It's not
exactly.
good for anybody else.
And it affects you, because what happens is it keeps you in this kind of downward energy level socially. It pulls on you in a negative way. And so unless you're actively restoring the areas in which you're releasing, then you start feeling drained. You leave that conversation with that person and you're like, oh, I'm exhausted from that. It's like the conversation has actually exhausted you. And being around someone who's life-giving, someone who is a positive influence, who makes you smile, who makes you laugh, who puts good energy back into your life, is how you counteract that.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. I love that. Now, one more question, and then we'll go to break, and then when we come back, I want to hit the next two. So, just so I'm clear, is it a 1-to-1 ratio? If you find yourself kind of being drained for an hour, do you have to go recharge in that same bucket for an hour, or does it work differently?
No, it really depends on how you're restoring yourself, because really rest should equal restoration. And so most of us already have in place some natural restorative things that we automatically do. We just don't know that they're actually helping us, or we don't call it rest. So, some of those things that you naturally do, you're already pouring back into those areas. The problem is when you have an area that you're depleting, but you don't even recognize it. So it stays at a level of depletion, and there's never any intentional recovery of that area.
Got it. So we're kind of ignoring it, almost feeling like we ought to toughen up or not acknowledge that that's a need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, so I'm going to roll us into break, and then we come back from break. I want to then talk about the other two of that kind of hidden four that you mentioned, and go into those a little bit, and then let's really see kind of how we can think about this even more holistically. I'd love to get your perspectives on that. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back. Here's your coaching minute for the week, presented to you by the Leadership Foundry. So credibility, as we know, is super, super important. Let's say now you've gotten into a new job. You've either got a new boss or a new team, and you're trying to build credibility really, really quickly right out of the gate. One of the easiest ways to do that is focus on proactive communication. We all do the reactive communication stuff. People text us, IM us, email us, and we respond. Focus on proactive communication, particularly status updates. It's so simple and easy, but it's a great way to provide quick clarity into what you're working on and build credibility. And I find it to be the best way to enhance trust quickly with a new boss. So put on your calendar either every Friday or every Monday, typically the end or beginning of a week, to send to your boss what are maybe those 3 to 5 things you got accomplished during the week, and what are the 3 to 5 things that you're going to work on the next week. And you'll find after about 3 or 4 or 5 weeks of doing that with your new boss, that they'll say, hey, those were really great. You don't need to send those anymore. I really appreciate what you've been up to. So give it a try. It's a quick way to build credibility and enhance trust right out of the gate. Welcome back from break. Of course, this is the Brandon Smith Show, and I have Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith on for us, talking today about rest. And so right before the break, we were talking specifically about those hidden four, the ones that we don't often think about. And you talked about emotional and social. Mm-hmm. Now, I believe the other two, I'm hoping I remember these correctly, was one creative and one was sensory?
That's correct.
Okay, so talk to us about those two. What do those mean? And how can we know when we're getting a little bit overwhelmed or tired or in need of rest on those two?
Well, creative rest is really interesting because most people don't really see themselves as a creative, so to speak. So when I say that they can have a creative rest deficit, they think, well, I'm not an artist, I'm not a singer, I'm not an author, I'm not doing any of these things that require creativity. But the reality is most of our careers now are a creative art in themselves. If you're having to be innovative in any way, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a small business owner, if you're someone who's sitting down with students and having to come up with teaching plans, All of these things require innovation. They all require creativity. So we've limited really how we view creativity. And because of that, we aren't allowing ourselves to be restored creatively because we don't
Mm,
think that we're creatives. But
mm,
what I find is that a large number of people, or especially millennials, are getting this new understanding that something happens, just like authors get, writer's block, and musicians kind of lose their muse, so to speak, that people who are in business get to a point sometimes where they feel like they've lost their ability to be innovative, to be at the top of their game, to think
huh.
outside of the box. And that's really where a creative rest deficit will present itself. When you have that kind of feeling like, I don't have any new ideas. I can't keep up with the people who are coming in behind me that are learning this new stuff so fast. And the way to counteract that is, well, for most people, they are already know what works for them. They just don't apply it in their day-to-day life. If you're someone who's ever gone to the beach and the moment you see the water, it's like all of a sudden you just feel inspired and at peace and at rest, and you just feel better and you can't even explain what that is. Or if you're someone who feels that same way when you're at the lake, or in the mountains or in nature of some sort. That's what creative rest looks like. Creative rest is the rest that is obtained when we allow ourselves to appreciate beauty. It's the awe and the wonder that's kind of awakened inside of us from creativity, whether it's natural creativity or if it's man-made. Some people get the very same experiences inside of art museums, or listening to the symphony or the orchestra, or watching a theater event happen. It's how you allow creativity to awaken something inside of you. It's not putting a demand on your creativity. So it's not going to one of those wine and art classes. That's actually putting a demand on your creativity. It's fun, but it's not creative rest. Creative rest is allowing the beauty to create something inside of you.
What's really interesting and fascinating, and I love it about so far the pattern that I'm seeing in all this, is when we have a need and when we need to be recharged, it's not so much about avoiding it. It's finding the healthier version of that thing and getting that for you.
Absolutely.
Which I
Yes.
think
It's
is so interesting.
self-treatment.
Yeah.
Like self-medication, rather than I am an internal medicine physician, so obviously I write prescriptions all day. It's part of my job. But my goal is always to help people see what is it that I can do in my lifestyle that will give me this as good of a benefit, sometimes even a better benefit than just popping a pill for it. Because oftentimes there are very simple, natural lifestyle changes that can really help these things. And with creative rest, I talked about the beach and the lake and all of that, but most of us just can't go take a beach sabbatical whenever we get bummed out or when our energy level goes down. But, the science shows that even when people are shown like images of the beach, that the same reaction that happens on MRIs in the brain when they were,
Oh, cool.
the same reaction happened. So, why not, if you live in, or you work, let's say, in an office with the plain brown walls, why not put up a beautiful picture? Something that's inspirational, that inspires you, that'll let you kind of reconnect to whatever that creative place you need to get to stay at a level of being as your best, really.
Okay, so now I'm really curious about the last one. So sensory, because some of that last stuff feels sensory-ish to me. So tell me about that one.
Yeah, sensory rest, really a sensory rest deficit, I should say, starts off when you are having the ongoing kind of sensory inputs from your environment, maybe things that you're not really cognitive of, especially in our electronic world we live in right now with all the gadgets, and you got notifications binging on one side and bright lights and blue lights and all this other stuff. Well, the issue with that is most of us are having continuous sensory input, and we never allow ourselves to do the things necessary to heal in our senses. The two of the easiest ways to get sensory rest are darkness and silence, and most of us get very little of either one.
Mm. So no, in that case, it is more about finding ways to give your senses a break. Give them time to just, I love the word heal. Just give them time to heal, whether that's darkness or silence. Find some ways to kind of let them do that.
Absolutely. And the sensory inputs can be so minute that you don't really understand how it's affecting you. I know one of my clients made this comment about she's a stay-at-home mom. So in her mind, she thought, well, because I'm home all the time, I'm not exposed to a lot of sounds and
Oh,
things.
no.
So then we started talking about, she had 3 girls. I mean, she had high decibel sounds all day long,
Yeah.
And then the smells of home and all of this stuff, constant sensory input. And then another client who worked in an open cubicle type office space. She's in a creative field, kind of the Silicon Valley type mentality, where their creativity is in this group mindset. So everything was like this open desk. So what ends up happening with that is she's constantly hearing other people's conversations in the background talking. There's lights everywhere. There's always movement. There was never any just kind of even just quiet space just within the office, just to be able to focus your attention for a moment to clear your thoughts. So obviously when she left home, left the office every day to go home, she was always anxious. And she could never figure out, why am I so wound up? I come into this place at peace and I leave wound up. That's what a sensory rest deficit looks like.
Wow. Okay. So, all right, you covered those 4, and then we have the kind of the initial 3. So do you see common patterns with senior leaders or just leaders in general? I mean, the folks that come to talk to you, are there certain ones of these when, she or he talks to you about their role that you say, oh, I bet they're going to bring up these?
My coaching clients, usually the number 1 and number 2, because most of them are entrepreneurs, or they're I call high achievers. They're people who are out there getting stuff done. So they are really going at life, and they have a lot of balls in the air almost all the time. And so the 2 that tend to stand out the most for them are the emotional rest and the creative rest. Emotional because they are always on. They are always in front of people. They're presenting, or they're showcasing something, or they're in publicity doing something. So they're always feel like that they're on. And it's really important for them to get to a place of understanding the benefit of healthy relationships, and not just downplaying that as kind of, I'll get to that when I have time. I think that, the worst thing that can happen as a leader is to get success in every area, but have your home life fall to pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. So while you were speaking, I had a question come in from my studio, but I couldn't hear it perfectly. So I'm going to ask them. So production studio, what was the question that you wanted me to ask?
Talking about working from rest rather than to rest.
Okay, so the question was tell us a little bit more about the difference between working from rest rather than to rest.
Well, that's the misconception of our culture right now. I think most of us have really grown up in this culture of thinking, I will work, and then once I get the work done, then I'll have time to rest. The problem with that is the work will never be done. There will always be work to do. And that what we're missing in that, and what's led to really this culture, this burnout culture we currently live in, where most people hate their jobs and feel like, if I can only get to a point where I don't have to go to work. Well, work was never supposed to be a bad thing. The problem is we have really misappropriated the work-rest ratio. The way it was supposed to originally be was that we didn't work to earn our rest, but we worked from a place of rest. That rest is really where we got filled up, so that once we're filled in all of these 7 buckets, we're able then to pour out into the world the best of ourselves. Whereas most of us now, we're working from a place where we are pouring out into the world from our leftovers. And then we wonder why we're not excelling and exceeding in all of the different ways that we could.
Yeah, totally. So let me ask you a little bit about how vacations fit into this. Is there a strategy we should use? Like, I back when my kids were little, and when I was starting my business as an entrepreneur, I couldn't take, A, I didn't have the money, but it was also B, it was very hard to take 2-week or 3-week vacations to be away from my clients. So what I would typically do is more quarterly vacations, and they'd be mini vacations wrapped around weekends. And so it would be a nice thing because it would be a little carrot out there, and I'd be looking forward to it, and I would kind of recharge a little bit. But I'm not sure if that's the right strategy or not. So you could use vacations like interval training like that, or you could use big wins that charge you over 3 weeks. Do you have an opinion on that? I'd be really curious.
Vacations don't work.
There it is. There's the opinion, folks. They just don't work.
All of us have been on vacation and come back, and what happens? You come back and your desk is packed up with stuff, and you're stressed out from the vacation. Vacations don't work. Vacations, what happens is when we go on vacations, we don't go to rest. We go to have fun with our family. And so we end up spending a lot of times often doing activities we never have time to do when we're at home. You know, we do the mini golf and all this other stuff. We do the roller coaster rides and all this other stuff that we don't have time to do at home, but it's not restful. It's just fun. It's really a time to go have fun away from home with our families. If you're trying to have a restful vacation, it has to be extremely intentional, where you're going to allow time to be restored in the places where you poured out. So rather than really teaching my clients about vacations, what we talk about is how to live a lifestyle of rest, how to incorporate really just simple tasks throughout the day to allow them to stay in a place of rest, to quickly identify, you know, oh, okay, I'm getting some neck stiffness and pain, and my attitude is shifting in the wrong direction after dealing with that particular person, or my head's not clear right now. I'm just trying to grind out this proposal, and it's not going to be great because I'm not in a good headspace. To identify that stuff immediately, and then to know how to address it. And so that's what we talk about. How do you fix it in the moment without letting it just compound like most of us have done for so many years?
Yeah. Right. And there's a certain societal payoff and pressure to just kind of push through, right? Let's see how strong and tough you are, right? To kind of push through and don't ask for help and don't kind of say, I need to recharge. So
that's the thing. The recharging can be very short, you know, that's what I think most people are surprised about, how quickly the right technique can help you recharge and refocus and be restored fast enough so that it doesn't feel like it's costing your productivity, but it's actually increasing your productivity.
So what would be an example of one of those really quick ones?
A really quick one I would say is if you're someone who has a tendency to get what I call brain fog, you know, you're working and all of a sudden it's like, what am I thinking about? Or why can't I come up with any new ideas or anything like that? If you've been sitting at the same spot forever, trying to hash it out on your computer or keyboard, what I usually tell people to do is start practicing what's called body fluidity. It's a practice of not allowing yourself to be static for prolonged periods of time. Some people do it on a set schedule. Some people do it kind of more intuitively. But when you have those moments where you know that you're getting kind of blocked up, to remind yourself of the freedom you have by going outside for a moment. Take a 5-minute walk around the building. Go get some water. Most of us are chronically dehydrated. So if you're not flowing, you know, here, go get some water and get some flow in within your body in a different way. Because what happens is just the change in scenery starts helping the brain get to a different place. Some people say, well, I can't get up every time I have a problem, you know, focusing. Well, another alternative is having some place within your office space or within your room that you're working where you can pull your attention to either a single thought or to a single picture. So some people use word pictures just to kind of help focus their thoughts. Some people just use an image. Some people just use a blank wall. But it's just allowing yourself to have the time, really giving yourself the permission to be able to do that.
Fantastic. Fantastic. This was incredibly helpful. I'm going to get some rest. I've decided I'm going to get some rest. So before we move towards close, I ask all my guests this question. What is one life hack you have for us to help us live a life more free from dysfunction, either personally or professionally?
Yes, I would say that one life hack would be to refuse to let the people you care about answer the question, how are you doing today, with a simple, I'm fine. Demand that they actually answer the question fully.
Beautiful. I love that. So how do you do that when they say, because they're going to say, I'm fine. And then what do you say?
Yes, they will. They will. Well, what I do with those that are in my circle, I say, I love you too much to allow you to get away with an answer you didn't think about.
That's great.
I'm fine just means I don't really want to talk about the hard things that are going on with my life. And then that opens up even more dysfunction because those hard things never get exposed in the light where there can actually be some healing and some recovery.
Yeah, beautiful. I love it. Thank you so much for coming on the show. So if people want to learn more about you, buy a copy of the book, where can they go?
Yeah, the book Sacred Rest, Recover Your Life, Renew Your Energy, Restore Your Sanity is available wherever books are sold. And I highly recommend everyone check out the free rest assessment. It helps you determine which of the 7 types of rest you're deficient in. And that's available on my website at restquiz.com.
Restquiz.com.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Thank you. Absolute gift. I'm already feeling a little better with a plan to feel even better as we move into this year. So thank you, Dr. Saundra. I really appreciate it. And thank you for listening and watching the show. Of course, continue to follow us every week, whether on Facebook Live or listen to a new show on iTunes. And please rate, review, and subscribe to iTunes so more listeners can follow the show, so we can increase our tribe and make our working lives and careers and even personal lives that much better. So until the next show, have a great week and an awesome life.